Hello, I'm Mike Toth with Elite Investigations here in Billings, Montana. This is Behind the Investigation, and this is where the story takes a darker turn. Gary Ray Hose was just 6 years old when he vanished in 1976. Nearly 5 decades later, he's still missing. No body, no arrest, no justice. But in this episode, we dig even deeper into the secrets that were never meant to be uncovered, and how some of the very people who should have helped find Gary may have done more to stall the search than support it. The evidence didn't just disappear, it was buried. And I went to Arizona to see if anything or anyone was buried with it. So grab a cup of coffee or your favorite drink. You're about to see why this case has never been solved and how close we were to finally changing that. This is Behind the Investigation, Part 2, The Search for Gary Ray Hose. Hello. In Part 1, we uncovered the disturbing story of a 6-year-old boy who vanished in 1974. No missing person report, no search party, just silence and fear. But now, we pick up where we left off. Because the deeper we dig, the more resistance we face, and the more determined we become to find out what really happened to little Gary. At this point in the investigation, we had learned something troubling. Maricopa County Sheriff's Office told us that even if we could prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that Gary's mother killed him, she likely still would never be arrested for that crime. Why, you ask? Because she was suffering from onset dementia, and they believed she never would face justice for what she did. They did attempt to interview her, to ask her where Gary was, but they were stopped by a lawyer she had somehow hired in her mental state. It was frustrating. She was apparently clear-minded enough to retain legal counsel, but not well enough to be held accountable for what she did to Gary, or possibly did. Following the searches at the North Phoenix home, and after talking with the babysitter who witnessed the abuse firsthand, one place kept coming back. That remote patch of desert land the family clung to for decades. The 3 to 5 acres of sun-scorched dirt outside of Maricopa County, Arizona, in Pinal County. They moved there just days after Gary disappeared. They lived in a trailer for a short time, but when the local school started asking questions about Gary, they packed up and moved the trailer from the land and left it completely bare. They never built on it. They never returned to live there again, but they never sold it. Even when money was tight, even when the father was dying of cancer, which, as we all know, is very expensive, they held on to that land. And I wanted to know why. It was time to take this investigation to the next level. We secured maps, aerial photos, and land records. Everything that we could to get our hands on. I was able to convince the Maricopa County Cold Case Unit to obtain a search warrant for that desert property. The Sheriff's Office brought in cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. But for some reason, they only searched about 2 acres, less than half of the property. The warrant was valid for 10 days. They had 10 days to go out and search. They were only there one. And after that, nothing more happened. My client and I were frustrated. We had hoped that they would return within the 10-day window and finish what they started. But when I called the lead detective, she made it perfectly clear to me they were not going back to that property. Once that warrant expired and we knew law enforcement wasn't returning, we had a decision to make. Earlier, with my drone, I was able to identify on that property some strange areas, some anomalies that stood out. I reached out to the local colleges and talked to some geologists there, experts in soil displacement and ground structure. They confirmed what I had suspected. Some areas just didn't look right. That's when things started to shift. My client and I agreed it was time to take the next step. There was no fence on that property, there was no police tape, there was no posted signs, no warnings about no trespassing. So my client, Gary's brother, rented a backhoe and returned to the property. He began digging in a spot that we believed was where the old septic tank had been buried. You know what? He was right. He found it. He uncovered the tank and pulled it out of the ground. He opened it up and he searched inside and where it was underneath it. But there was no sign of Gary. He did find some strange items that did raise some suspicion, but later we determined that it was unrelated to Gary's case. Just as he was preparing to continue digging, law enforcement stepped in. The lead detective from Maricopa County arrived on scene with lights and sirens. But here's the problem. That land isn't even in her jurisdiction. It's in Pinal County, which is south of Maricopa County. She told my client, Gary's own brother, that if he put another shovel in the ground, he'd be arrested for disturbing a potential crime scene. Let that sink in. The man who lost his brother, the only one still searching for him after 40 years at this time, was being threatened with jail for trying to find out the truth. But at that moment, my client's girlfriend was on the phone with me, and I could hear everything going on. I could hear the detective yelling, threatening to arrest Guy. She told him they were interfering with an active warrant. But that wasn't true. The warrant had expired. So I stayed on the phone and I coached them through what to say to the detective. We reminded the detective there was no posted restrictions for us being on there. There was no official order to vacate. And most importantly, she had no legal jurisdiction in that county. And the warrant was only good for 10 days, and that 10 days had gone by. This was Pinal County, not Maricopa County. So Pinal County deputies did respond, and they arrived shortly after. They assessed the situation, and they agreed with us. They told the Maricopa County detective she needed to leave the scene. But they also advised my client he couldn't continue digging at this time until he received written permission from his mother, who still technically owned the property. And let's not forget, she's the suspect. So we paused. I had my client formally request that Pinal County assign a detective to the case so I could bring them up to full speed on everything that we had learned and uncovered up to this point. So after the standoff at the property, I was able to connect with a detective from Pinal County. We spoke several times on the phone. He was very respectful, and he understood our position. But in the end, it was the same story we'd heard before. Because this was such an old case, a very cold case, Gary was slipping through the cracks again. Pinell County ultimately told us, even though the property was in their jurisdiction, they wouldn't be getting involved. Why, you ask? Because they believe the crime, the actual death of Gary, likely happened in Maricopa County. So now neither agency wanted to touch it. And to make matters worse, thanks to the scene that the Maricopa County detective caused when my client was simply trying to search the land using his own money, his own time, and with no legal restrictions in place, we were now being told that if we stepped foot on that property again, we would be charged with criminal trespass and arrested. Let me repeat that. The only brother still actively trying to find Gary now faces arrest for simply going to the land that's been in his family for decades, land where he believes his brother is buried. Put that in perspective. The mother, who technically owns the land still and is technically the suspect in the murder of Gary, she's been living in Oregon. She hadn't stepped foot on that property in over 40 years, and she is now suffering from onset dementia. She wouldn't even have known we were there. And it's not like my client was damaging anything. There's no structures on that land. There's no home, there's no fencing, there's no nothing. It's just empty desert. But we were told loud and clear, stay off the land or be arrested. It was so frustrating. It was beyond frustrating. We had come so far. We had strong leads. We had science. We had satellite data and cadaver dogs alerting in areas. And we were willing to dig, literally and figuratively, to get to the truth. But now, all we could do is wait. We had to wait for the one person who could legally give permission to die before we could take any further action. Because there was no way she was ever going to give us permission to go onto that land while she was alive. Remember, they had made a pact that as long as one of them was alive, they were never to sell the land or let anybody go onto the land. Took about a year, maybe a little more, before the mother passed away. And for a brief moment, we thought we finally would have access to the land without restrictions. But then we learned something unexpected. In her will, she had left the land to a local church in Oregon. So once again, another delay, another layer of red tape. But my client and his girlfriend did not give up. They reached out to that church. They explained everything to them, what they suspected mother and father had done all those years ago, and how Gary, just 6 years old, was likely buried on that land. They told the truth, and thankfully, the church listened. And after several conversations, they came to an agreement. The land was now transferred over and belongs to my client. He finally has full legal control of the property. It's been almost 10 years since I first looked at this case. And to this day, there isn't a week that goes by that I don't think about little Gary, a 6-year-old boy forgotten by the system, erased by his abusers, and ignored by the very people who are supposed to protect him. And to this day, no one in law enforcement is looking for him. So what now? Well, as you can imagine, it's been a roller coaster of a time and emotions for my client and his family. He struggles with survivor guilt, that he couldn't do more to protect Gary back then, that they couldn't do more to stop what happened, that after all this time, They still don't have the resources to conduct a full professional excavation of that land. And since there's no one to arrest, the police have simply filed the case back into the cold case cabinet. Sure, my client will go out there on the weekends whenever he can and search aimlessly with a shovel, and sometimes he'll rent a backhoe, but he's not a professional. He can't afford to hire a crew to go out there and do it properly. He just wants to find Gary. But the world has moved on. And now it seems like he's the only one. Both parents are gone now. There's no confession. There's no new witness. There's no hidden diary that tells us where Gary's buried. We're left with a name, a face, a heartbreaking question that never fades. And for now, all we can do is tell his story and hope that maybe one day we'll find his remains, that we can give him a proper burial he deserves, and that Gary won't spend eternity alone in a forgotten piece of desert. I want to thank you for joining me for this special 2-part episode of Behind the Investigation. Gary Ray Ho's story is one that has stayed with me, and I hope after watching it, it stays with you too. And if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for caring, for listening, and for helping keep Gary's memory alive. Because the more people who know Gary's name, the harder it becomes for the truth to stay buried. So, as always, stay safe, stay curious, and never stop asking questions. Until next time.